Welcome to the Growth Plus Exit podcast, where owners of privately held middle market companies talk about founding, scaling, and exiting their businesses successfully. Learn how to maximize and monetize your business on your own terms. Let's get started.
Hi, I'm Susan Carney, and I'm the host for the Growth Plus Exit podcast, where middle market owners and CEOs share their stories about founding, scaling, and sometimes exiting their businesses. The episode today is brought to you by Newport LLC. We're a cadre of business founders and C-suite executives who have founded, built, and sold businesses of our own, and we help private company owners do the same on their own terms, hopefully. You can learn about us at Newport LLC. For today's episode, we're going to do something a little bit different, though. We're not going to be interviewing a current owner-operator of a business. Instead, we're going to be talking with my colleague, Newt Fowler. Newt is an entrepreneur. He's a business transaction attorney and a partner at Womble Bond out of their Baltimore office. And what I want Newt to do is talk with us a little bit today about transactions, selling your business, and how owners should think about that, and how they should think about a transaction attorney in that process, because it's a vital role. And many owners haven't sold a business before, so they don't understand what that role is about. So, Newt, thank you so very much for being with us today.
Pleasure to be here.
Awesome. So let's start and talking a little bit about your background and how you got your expertise, Newt. Tell us a little bit about your education and how you became to be a transaction attorney. What interested you about that path? How'd you get there?
Sort of in a stumbling process, I got to say. I started as a frustrated English major, decided I didn't want to do academics, and said, well, what else do you do in the mid-'80s? So I said, I'll go to law school. So I went to law school, and what they teach in law school is all about litigation, cases. You read cases the whole time. So I didn't have any idea what a transactional lawyer was. It wasn't, frankly, until recent decades that law schools had sort of woken up to the idea that transactional lawyers shouldn't be reading litigation to figure out how to do deals. That's just the carcass side of it. So I grew up in Kentucky, born and bred. I went to a tiny little college, Center College in Danville, Kentucky. Went to the University of Kentucky Law School and ended up at a great firm here in Baltimore called Venable, Baker and Howard at the time. Mm-hmm. And when I got to Venable, I was a class of 36, and they just sort of slotted you wherever they had need. And I ended up in the finance space, not the space for Newt. So I stumbled through for a number of years until I happened upon a very small company called MicroPro Software, who liked a young lawyer, liked his creativity. And that's where I started learning how to work with entrepreneurs. So it was not intentional. It was purely happenstance.
Yeah. And so what was it about your approach that young is good, but what was it about your approach that they found creative or unusual or comforting?
I was curious. In fact, I think for most entrepreneurs, we tend to gravitate to those that are curious about what we do and try to really understand what makes our organization tick. And so, they hired me to do push paper, but the reality was they were, I got fascinated with how you designed and built software. Sid Rubin, who was one of the early stars of the industry, really took a shine to me. And we spent a lot of time just learning how it works, how the functionality of it works, how you hook customers with it, how you did distribution of, at that point, CDs, which you loaded into a computer. So there wasn't any downloading concept at that point. So I was just curious, and I've always been curious. One of the joys of doing this for almost 4 decades is I get to deep dive into worlds that I had no idea existed.
Yeah, I've always felt that way about the work that I've done in my career as well. It's like an extended MBA program to constantly be learning different industries, different companies, different people, different approaches. So that's your first kind of pearl of wisdom there. That's a great piece of advice for anyone, right? Be curious.
Be curious.
Be curious. And I think you took a little side path for a while as an entrepreneur yourself. Tell us about that.
I did. I spent a couple of decades at Venable, ended up running their tech transactions and venture practice. Mm-hmm. My wife thought I was crazy, and she was probably right. And I spent a lot of time with one particular client and got really excited about his technology. And he didn't want to run the company. He had already run one and sold one before. And he said, do you want to try out running a business? And I said, sure. I wish there was a whole lot of more thought that was given to it, but it seemed to me to be a great opportunity. We had 2 little kids, which is part of the reason why I was declared insane by my wife. But and what I learned very quickly is the other aspect. I was always looking at a company and how it operated and functioned and what it did and what its market was and who its customers were and competition. And that had been my world for 20 years. And then all of a sudden I realized what really makes things tick as a CEO are the people and are the dynamics, and how do you motivate folks? How do you make sure you make the right hires? How do you help people be successful? How do you make tough decisions when perhaps you have the wrong person in the wrong swim lane? And it was a real struggle for me because that is not a skill set that I had garnered or developed over the last period of time. It wasn't what you hired me to do.
Right.
And it was a very difficult, as you were talking about sort of the MBA process. I viewed the 2 years that I was in the startup running it as my MBA. I really learned that as a CEO, so much depended and revolved around managing people and sort of clearing out the clutter and debris and blockages that kept an organization from being successful.
And so is that a lesson that in any way you took back to your legal career when you returned to being an attorney? Or did you say, whew, thanks, I'm glad I'm done with that part. Let me get back to the paperwork and the business side?
Vanity of vanities. I think that's actually what made me a very different lawyer when I went back into the practice. So I'd always been curious about how businesses operate, and now I had a layer. And frankly, it sort of laid on top as opposed to underneath of sort of, tell me about your organization, tell me about your people, tell me about sort of who's in what roles and how things are working and what deficits you have. And when you deal with any organization, any company, it's the rare one that has every seat on every bench filled correctly.
Right.
So part of the challenge, and this plays into the transactional discussion that will come, but part of the challenge is, do I have the right people in the right spots at the right time? And the right time is the critical part, because you're not always going to have somebody in the right spot at any given time, but at the time you really need it. And so I began to really understand more about how organizations, whether intentionally or not, design their leadership team and focused on really what mattered. And that plays, Susan, not only at the executive level, but it also plays at the board level. Do you have the right board? Do you have the right seats filled to deal with a marketing issue or an exit issue or a finance issue or an industry expertise? So I often talk about matrices and figuring out, what do I need for the next 2 years, both on the executive side, and then ultimately, what do I need for the next 2 years on the director side? How do I intentionally design my organization to have the human resources needed to achieve whatever my objectives are?
Yeah, that's a great perspective. I often think of it as kind of the holy triad, right? The CEO, the leadership team, and the board and governance side. And if all three of them are healthy and working well, then that triangle gets bigger and bigger and bigger because it allows the company to grow. So,
yeah, and to play off that for a sec, not only does it allow the company to grow, but it allows you to know what you're supposed to be focused on as the CEO, making sure that that triangle is healthy, making sure you got the right folks in the right corners of it, so to speak. And it is always a work in process. It is, you never achieve it. It's never stasis.
Yeah. So now I can see why you're so appealing to clients and they work with you for such a long time, because the combination of being curious and them feeling comfort that you have sat in their seat, you've made tough decisions, you understand what they're going through, that must be just great for them.
I think it allows the guards to be dropped a little bit. I mean, one of the challenges you face in as a lawyer or any service provider, and I'm sure you've experienced this as well, is sort of peeling the onion or dropping the curtains, whatever metaphor works, and ensuring that you're getting a clear read or clear visibility into what the challenges really are for an organization. And I think sometimes when you've walked in the shoes, and this is certainly true of the Newport team, you all can say, I've been on the other side of the curtain, right? I've been where the onion's fully peeled. And so I think that awareness and that recognition, it's more than just a shared journey that somebody's been on. It is, you kind of get where I am. and it allows a little more efficient interaction and a little more ease and less friction in getting to sort of what really is driving an organization or impeding one.
Yeah. And I think, compared with CEOs of public companies or even very, very large private companies, these owners of the smaller companies, a lot of their wealth is tied up in the company, a lot of their ego, a lot of their emotion is tied up in those companies. And so, having someone who can relate to you so well personally and professionally is great. And as an attorney, I'm sure you've learned a great deal of patience because it's in a more emotional relationship than it would be if you were working for IBM.
It's interesting. I think of it as another child sometimes for a CEO, particularly for a founder CEO, somebody that this is their child. And to twist the metaphor even more, the image even more, not only is it their child, but it's hard to sometimes explain what the ugly spots are on it, Yeah. And there's a process that you have to go through to really ensure that everybody's different, every personality is different, but there's a process you've got to go through to kind of help somebody see themselves, and that's true in a transactional environment in particular. To see sort of what needs to be done to position a company for exit or financing or whatever the event is.
Yeah. So that's a good segue. Let's talk a little bit about this role of a transaction attorney. Tell me how you see that and what are the key contributions or activities that kind of attorney undertakes on behalf of an owner?
It's tricky, Susan. Often when you make a decision to sell the company, then you'd say, okay, I'm going to go find my lawyer, or I'm going to use my existing lawyer to help me. And that's at one level, that's probably the right paradigm to start with. But at another level, you've really got to figure out what is it I need to be successful in the sales process. And the cautionary notes I always give somebody is don't assume your lawyer is a banker.
Right.
Because they're not.
Right.
Don't assume that they're an accountant or a finance expert, because by and large, they may be able to spot issues, but they're not. Mm-hmm. What good lawyers in our space do, and the transaction space do, is understand the transactional mechanics of what has to happen. Letters of intent, sales process, indications of interest, confidentiality agreements, the diligence process, definitive documentation, non-competes, economic terms, all that transactional stuff. There are a whole universe of transactional lawyers that know that. The question really becomes, what is it that enables me to have as smooth a possible process in the sale or a financing as possible? And I think that the opportunity presented when someone's sort of interviewing lawyers or deciding whether who they currently work with can handle a transaction is really to ask questions around what should I be focused on? What should I be worried about? How would you set the stage over not the next week, but over a month or several year process, multi-month or several year process, to actually ensure that you're positioning the company in the best possible light? Mm-hmm. Listen carefully. If it sounds like transactional noise, well, you got to get a confidentiality agreement or an NDA. That's probably a good lawyer who could help you with that process, but it's not a lawyer who necessarily is attuned to how are you dealing with state and local tax issues. Tell me about your employee base. Tell me about what kind of customer concentration you have. Let's understand whether you're in a growth space or not a growth space. Talk about total addressable market or TAM. Help me understand and give me a broad field of vision in particularly blind spots of what you may or may not understand about your business. So, competent lawyers can push paper. The question really is that enough for you as an organization to ensure that you're positioning yourself for success?
Mm-hmm. Would you rather have someone who's both curious and experienced and knows what is going on?
You have to have both. And the tricky part, Susan, is there are folks that love the business and deal side, love to talk to you about what's going on, love to give you guidance. And then they sort of drift as the transaction starts becoming more transactional, meaning more pushing paper, pushing through the due diligence, negotiating key terms and things of that sort, and they kind of lose interest. So the art of this is to try to find somebody who's got really a passion for both, or at least at a minimum pays attention to what matters during the transaction phase, even if they're using younger lawyers or, to a client's ears, less expensive lawyers in the process.
Yeah, you and I have worked on a couple projects together where we've had to pull a deal team together. And it strikes me that, so there's an equation that I tell my clients all the time if they're thinking about selling, and that is risk up, valuation down. And the opposite is quite true. And so members of this deal team, whether it's an accountant, whether it's an attorney, investment banker, I view as risk managers. And not all attorneys are up for that role, but that really is an important part of what you do is risk management for that business owner. Yeah.
I think all of the service provider team, you all included in the transactions we've worked on, want to manage risk. The question really, and the image I use in that context is, and it's the Disney image, there's behind the curtain and then there's in front of the curtain. Mm-hmm. And the behind the curtain is, let me understand where the problems lie, whatever they are, whether they're tax issues or employment related issues or customer concentration. Let's understand that. And let's figure out what our strategy is to deal with those issues and present them in the best light possible in a transaction. That's when the curtain opens. One thing that I hate to say it drives me crazy. One thing that drives me crazy is I never want a buyer, particularly a buyer's lawyer, to tell me something I don't know.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
It's not that I don't mind surprises. They happen inevitably in a transaction, but it is that risk formula you just talked about. That's just increased the risk for the transaction and opened up Pandora's box in terms of pricing or terms on pricing. Mm-hmm. And so you really, the reflex always when you're running a company, or almost always, is to kind of push past some of the friction. Just keep going. And a sale transaction is the friction that gets you, mm-hmm. whatever it is in the business.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And boy, I sure don't like to have anybody know it before I do.
No.
Because then I can't think it through and plan for it. And
no, you're in a reactive mode. You can't put anything in a bow. The curtain's already open.
Yeah, that's right. And so when should an owner think about engaging a transaction attorney? Is it when they've decided to go to market? Is it earlier? Is it after they're halfway through the transaction? Is there a magic answer to this, or is it depends?
Well, it depends. But the reason I'm laughing a little bit is because no entrepreneur worth their salt wants to hire a lawyer too soon. Mm-hmm. And the challenge is understanding the balance, and it is a balance between when somebody like me or a colleague that does what I do can add immense value that will gel as part of the process, be additive to the process, and when are they a distraction and in a nuanced way or worse, too early in the game.
Yeah,
and part of that depends on making sure you hire the right lawyer. And I don't mean this to be mean. There are plenty of folks that do this extremely well. You need a lawyer who understands their role as a support role. And their role is sometimes to go back to the curtain metaphor, in the wings.
Yep.
Avoid lawyers that like the stage in a transaction because it really isn't about them. It's about you. It's about your company. It's about your customer base. It's the opportunity. It's not about a lawyer. And so I would suggest that you almost look at it as sort of a I don't know whether it's a sine or cosine, because again, I'm a frustrated English major, but there are moments when you need lawyers early in transactions and moments where you can thank them very much and put a pause button on them. Mm-hmm. I would argue if you use a banker in a banking process, you should hire a lawyer that knows what they're doing to help you make sure that engagement letter is solid and protects you and provides some transparency and clarity to that banking process so that you are comfortable, how it's going to run. Mm-hmm. Then that lawyer can disappear for a while. They often will build a book or confidential information memorandum or book or a sales document. It is worth having a lawyer make sure there's no gotchas or problems in there. Most bankers are pretty good at avoiding that. again, thank the lawyer very much. Don't need him during the process. The place where most value really is added is in when you're starting to look, and hopefully you'll be blessed with enough options that you've got a handful of folks that are playing with valuation with the company and terms and stuff. Helping with letters of intent, I view as fairly critical. Again, I think it's an ebb and flow process, largely because there are two things. One, there are elements that you want in the letter of intent that are not always presented by a buyer.
Mm-hmm.
And two, there are nuances to price and terms that once you commit to them even though it's non-binding, are very hard to reset.
Mm-hmm.
And those are important things to have a lawyer involved in. Again, in a support role, they should really not be in the face of the buyer. They should be supporting the banker or the broker or Newport or whoever is sort of guiding that sales process. But I think it's very critical to frame the key business terms and economic terms correctly, because you're going to live with them. They're presidential.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. Let's turn to you personally for just a couple minutes.
Sure.
Can you tell me what it was like to be raised in Kentucky and what you learned there? What were your parents were like? What did they do?
Well, I was a preacher's kid, a PK. And my dad taught at a seminary. And one of the things I always loved doing was he would end up as a seminary professor, taking churches that were distressed and troubled in the greater sort of Kentucky region. And he'd be their supply, they call them supply ministers, but supply preacher at that church for 6 months or so. And I would ride shotgun with him.
Oh, great.
And that was really fun too. And I got to debrief with him why he would handle sermons differently, because I'd heard the same sermon a zillion times. I'd said, why'd you do it this way? Why'd you do it that way? And a lot of it was reading the audience, reading the sort of, health of the congregation, things of that sort. And I began to realize at that point that there's just more to what any of us do in service than simply delivering the advice, delivering the counsel, good pastoral care. And I loved it. And it also taught me, even though I wasn't even thinking about law school at the time that he was doing this, it also taught me that there are boundaries and barriers to what we do. You do want advocates, but you want advocates that don't go off the reservation. They're true to the core moral compass, even if you're trying to get the best deal possible or the best advice possible. And that's always stayed with me. Mm-hmm. And frankly, you learn in negotiations, because you're always dealing with sometimes a lot of lawyers, that not everybody is wired the same way when it comes to kind of their moral compass or their respect for other people or their underlying obligation to really sort of sublimate and do what's right for the client and right to make the transaction happen. So it's, we've been spending a lot of time, Susan, talking about sort of, looking at the entrepreneur and that sales process. But you also need a lawyer who can handle the disconnects and friction that occurs within the broader transaction group on the other side sometimes. Sometimes it's with your own banker too, by the way. But and not getting your own personality and ego in the way. And I think that's a lot of what I learned from Dad, sort of riding shotgun for him in Kentucky counties.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. And, as we both know, based on our experience, a sales process never goes as you would think it will. There are so many roller coasters, ups, down. People get cranky and people get tired and people get angry. It's very emotional. And so
it is. It also is a second full-time job.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that entrepreneurs, that certainly ones that have not sold and exited a business before, realize they're going to run two jobs. And one of the things I worry about, Susan, when particularly for a thinly structured leadership organization, is the one thing that almost always bites any company in a sales process is that as they focus on getting the deal done, they're sort of already counting the money in the bank. And all of a sudden, a quarterly revenue drops or expenses change in the EBITDA structure. And it gives buyers two things. One, what's going on, real pause. And then more opportunistically, maybe I can retrade price a little bit.
Right.
And so one of the early cautionary notes, and there's nothing I can really do to help, or you guys are better suited to help, is make sure that an entrepreneur, a leader, is focused entirely on how do I make sure this business runs as if I'm not selling it.
Mm-hmm. Once again, risk up, valuation down.
Absolutely.
Right. It all comes back to that. We live in a dynamic world. It seems like more dynamic every day. And you are in a very dynamic business, and transactions move fast and unpredictably. How do you stay current and relevant? What are the resources you look to? Because there's a lot.
Yes. That's a great question. I would actually say in the financing world as well, it even moves faster in the financing world in some ways. Mm-hmm. But in the exit world, I would say there are several layers to it. One is we're a large shop, and I increasingly rely on the expertise of others to ensure that some particular aspect of ERISA law or other tax areas or employment or privacy or cyber issues is covered by somebody who is living and breathing it and staying on top of those rapidly evolving environments. And in any transaction, it is a little faulty to assume that the one person that you're looking at has the magic wand to understand and master all that. And so what you're really trying to identify is a team, or certainly a leader, a point person for the team that gets where their strengths and weaknesses are, know when to pull somebody in, and more importantly, know when to get somebody back out. Because again, you want to manage cost and efficiency. And so I would answer the question by saying, really, I increasingly rely on very thoughtful, cutting edge folks in these particular disciplines. I have not seen the interpersonal dynamics or structural dynamics of transactions changing all that much. How they're done, when I started, I had to mark up a document and send it to word processing. And then the next morning, look at it again, mark it up, send it to word processing. We never went through 17, 18, 20, 50 versions of a transaction document back in the old days because nobody had patience for that.
Right.
Now it's a click of a button. It's a new version going out every day and every hour. I'll tell you the one area that I think is still unfolding that I don't have a handle on yet is the impact of AI on both the practice of law and the transactional setting. I certainly have seen what it's done for due diligence because that's already sort of been in play. And it's allowed for diligence to get more efficient. But the flip side of that is it's harder to hide the gremlins because the search functions and analytical functions are so good now. So it's not hoping they don't find the needle in the haystack. They're going to find the needle in the haystack. Yeah. Even if you don't know it's there. But the way we're philosophically looking at AI in our industry, at least in my firm, is that it is an important extension of how we do what we do. It does not replace us. And I think where you get into the risk area is when people think, okay, that'll solve it. It can produce the document and I'll be good. So it enhances and extends our competencies. The other thing I've been increasingly tuned into is that it's more of a conversation and a process and exchange in terms of how you use AI than a question and answer function, because it's only as good as the order of thinking that you put into it and the refinement to that thinking that you put into it. So again, everybody's struggling with it. Everybody's trying to figure it out. I do think as an industry, it's going to make, not for those who have kids that are thinking about law school, but I think it's going to make it harder for entry-level lawyers to find a more traditional path into starting their legal career. But I think for folks mid-level and senior and up, it is going to be a very leverageable extension of how we do what we do. It is amazing at how it can be used and efficiently. So those are sort of the themes that I see playing out right now.
Yeah. I have a niece who's going to law school. She just moved into her apartment yesterday to start her first year of law school.
Congratulations. That's exciting.
I know. I told her this is the most wonderful, awful thing you're going to do, because it's the traditional way you come out of law school and you're an associate and you work your way up and you learn so much at that level is going to change. Just not sure how.
Well, and not really germane to this to this topic, but germane to your conversation and your nieces. I'm not sure that law schools have yet figured out how to teach AI in the context of making you a better lawyer. So, it's a brave new world for all of us. It's true in every industry.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. It's reminiscent of the 70s when I was very young in the software business, and all my professors were far behind me in the practice of technology.
Yes.
It's hard academically to catch up.
Well, it goes back to my point earlier about the fact that, I am a transactional lawyer, and I never learned anything about how to be a transactional lawyer in law school.
Right.
Zero.
Yeah. Learned it on the job, right? So what are some of the pitfalls that you have seen that you would want our audience to avoid?
In the sales context?
In the sales context.
I'm going to have to say it's a great question because I'm trying to collect my thoughts. So it's a great question, Susan. It's hard to answer that there's a defined list for any particular organization thinking about selling. Mm-hmm. You have to be honest and look in the mirror and say, what are my strengths and what are my weaknesses? And really go through a probative process of understanding, do I have some tax problems? Mm-hmm. Do I have some accounting controls and procedures issues?
Yeah.
Do I have customer concentration or other customer issues? Are my contracts all terminable, at will? Do I have vendor or supplier headaches that are going to rear their head during the sales process? What's my market like? Am I a big fish in an even bigger pond, or do I have all I'm ever going to get? So I would argue that I would rather see an entrepreneur not ask, hey, what's the list you've seen? Because that list, if anybody like me is any good at that list, has to do with somebody else's set of problems.
Right.
So it would really be to surround yourselves with very thoughtful providers, you all, us, accountants, and really go through a learning exercise to figure out what is it that I should be focused on and worried about and that I can address, because some things you just simply can't address. If your market is sort of saturated, it is saturated. You're not going to solve that. Now, maybe you wait a few years and create a new product line and expand that market opportunity. But it is really a learning exercise that you have to go through to be able to be thoughtful and sort of say, here's the set of headaches or impediments that I need to deal with. Mm-hmm. But the ones that being said, the ones that do catch salt always. What do you mean I was supposed to pay taxes in New Jersey? Another one that I see entirely too much is, well, we're just going to 1099 a bunch of people so we don't have to deal with being, set up in that state. It's too big a headache. So there are a list of sort of predictable gotchas that you need to go through, that any buyer is going to is going to have that same list. But those are all manageable because you can solve for those. The ones that are harder are the ones that perhaps you were not willing to really see the mirror in.
Right. Or some you have no control over and you're impatient.
Yeah. And or unrealistic about sort of what your prospects are for exit, because it may be, I got to get out anyway, because it's, entropy is set in my industry and I got to do what I got to do to get out. Right.
That's right. Are there any questions I haven't asked you that I should have during the course of this conversation? What am I missing?
I would urge any entrepreneur to make sure they're hiring bright folks, business-oriented folks, thoughtful folks, experts in their field, because you got to know what you're doing. But they don't take themselves too seriously. They realize that the process is painful enough without putting screws to the thumbs. Mm-hmm. Pick people that you would enjoy working with and respect. and do your diligence, ask for references, talk to several people, because we all of us, Susan, come in different flavors.
Mm-hmm.
And just make sure you're getting a fit that works and resonates for you.
Perfect. That's a wonderful way to end this conversation, Newt. Thank you so much for doing this. I really appreciate it. Can you tell the folks where they can learn more about you?
Womble Bond Dickinson. If you Google Newt Fowler, Newt Fowler, and Google that with Womble Bond Dickinson, because our URL is written by lawyers.
Yeah, it is.
You'll find me. You'll find me. So thank you, Susan. I really have enjoyed this conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks. And we'll talk soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye now.
Thank you for listening to the Growth Plus Exit podcast, sponsored by Newport, a unique national business advisory firm. If you enjoyed this show, be sure to share, like, and subscribe for future episodes.